continuing our discussion about the time of Jacob's trouble and how Esau Edom avenged himself on the children of Jacob. Esau managed to rise to a position of power after Jacob took his birthright and the blessing. But how did he do it? Esau had help from otherworldly sources and by mixing himself with other nations. The Confederation helped Esau cut the children of Israel off from being a nation and traffic them around the world. I believe that Confederation also included the control of the children of Israel through religion. And we talked about this last time about the prophecy that said we would be serving gods that our ancestors did not know, gods of wood and stone. And what's interesting is that a lot of our people converted to Islam believing that Christianity was too Eurocentric, while ignoring the part that both played in the slave trade. As we look at the two religions, we also have to remember that both believed in forced conversion. Many people died for refusing to convert to Christianity or Islam. Were the disciples told to go out and win souls forcibly, or to share the good news, and if people didn't believe, to leave that home and shake the dust off their feet? Is it that the Most High is trying to force people to serve him? No, he gave us free will, and he honors that. Satan does not. As you continue to dig deep into this, you'll see that these two have a lot in common, more than we think. On the left, you see a picture of a group of Muslim women, and on the right, a picture of Catholic nuns. Same manner of dress. In both religions, prayer beads are used to mark the repetitions of prayers, chants, and devotions. So in Roman Catholicism, beads are used to pray the rosary to the Virgin Mary. And in Islam, beads are traditionally used to keep count while saying the prayer known as the Tashba of Fatima. So a lot of similarities here. And we know that the slave trade continued for many centuries. We also have to acknowledge that the Europeans had help. They're not the only guilty party in this. They had the help of Africans. But who are the Africans primarily responsible for selling other so-called Africans into slavery? So in this session, we're also going to take a look at one particular group that played a major role in the sub-Saharan and transatlantic slave trade. All right, now I want to focus on the Africans who sold other Africans into slavery. What's interesting is as you look at these ads from this digital collection, why do they all say Negroes for sale and not Africans for sale? Wouldn't it have been easier to classify all from the continent as Africans? That should tell us that they were not the same people. There were some distinctions that these Europeans knew about. And we're going to look at a particular group actively involved in Esau's Confederation. And they're still actively involved today. So let's look at some excerpts from this book called The Fullahs of Central Africa and the African Slave Trade. This was written by William Brown Hodgson, and it was published in 1859. Now, this is an extended discussion about the Fulani, or the Fullahs of West Africa. And the author is saying that these people could have stopped the slave trade at its source. So the book goes on to describe the considerable power held by the Fulanis. And as I said, basically saying if they really wanted to, they could have done a lot to assist the abolitionists to bring an end to the slave trade. Now, this is a part of our history that we really need to know. All right, so this is written to Francis Marceau, corresponding secretary to the National Institute in Washington, and he's saying, "My dear sir, I beg to submit to the National Institute some observations upon the ethnography of northern and central Africa and upon the means which that continent itself possesses for the suppression of the Atlantic slave trade." He's basically saying the answer to end the Atlantic slave trade is already possible, and it could happen there on the continent. All right, he goes on to say, he begins talking about these people, the Fullahs or the Falatas. It says, throughout the whole extent of Negrita or Negro land, the Fullahs undoubtedly occupy preeminence. They are found spread over a vast geographic region of 28 to 30 degrees in longitude, 1,500 miles, and of 7 to 10 in latitude, or 500 miles. He says, in the wide extent of this vast region, they are found under the various but similar names of Fulans, Fulani, Fulah, Fulani, Fulata, Fulatia, and Peels. So I'm going to drop down here. It says the Fullahs are not Negroes. They differ essentially from the Negro race in all the characteristics which are marked by physical anthropology. They may be said to occupy the intermediate space betwixt the Arab and the Negro. So it's like they're a cross between Arabs and Negroes. It says all travelers concur in representing them as a distinct race in moral as in physical traits. And then he goes on to describe their color, and he says they tend to be bronze, copper, red, reddish, and sometimes white has been applied. They concur also in the report that the Fullahs of every region represent themselves to be white men, and proudly assert their superiority over the black tribes among whom they live. So they're described as having woolly hair, crisp hair, and it says even though long, even woolly though long, justifies their classification among the woolly-haired populations. But it says, neither the traits of their features nor the color of their skin allow them to be confounded with Negroes. All right, it goes on to say the Fullahs belong to a middle race between the Negro proper and the African white race. What in the world is the African white race? Let's go on. All right, it says they consider themselves better than the native Negroes and always rank themselves among the white nations. It says the Fullahs are a warlike race of shepherds. Who does that remind you of? Okay, and within this century they have established a political organization, subjugated a large portion of Sudan, and founded Sokoto, the capital of their empire. All right, let's drop down. It says they are rigid Mohammedans, and according to Malin, the French traveler's report, they are animated by a strong zeal for proselytism. They are the missionaries of Islam among the pagan Negro tribes. Where they have conquered, they have forced the adoption of the Quran by the sword. Esau rules with his sword. And whilst pursuing quietly their pastoral occupations, they are the schoolmasters, and thus propagate the doctrines and precepts of Islam. Wherever the Fullah has wandered, the pagan idolatry of the Negro has been overthrown. All right, let's take another look at this. It says the Fulahs are now exercising a powerful influence upon the moral and social condition of Central Africa. So he says, I do not doubt that they are destined to be the great instrument in the future civilization of Africa and the consequent suppression of the external Atlantic slave trade. All right, it goes on to say the Fulahs will probably erect one vast empire in Sudan, and the influence which that power may exert in the great question of African civilization gives to them no ordinary importance. So he's basically saying these people exert a lot of power in the region. It says, so a slave vendor says to him that all of the slaves would have been sent to Rabat, the principal slave market at present in the interior of Africa. So this is where they were transferring the slaves into this area. But it goes down to say that I learned that the law relative to the abolition of slavery has been duly published by the Atta, and that all the inhabitants of the village approved of it as a good law. They confirm what has been so often stated, that the slave trade would not cease until the Fulahs were gained over to the slave trade abolition party. So in other words, if they wanted to abolish slavery, the abolitionists had to win over these people. Interesting, right? All right, so it goes on to talk about how the Mohammedans basically has used education and religion to civilize the lowly Negroes, in other words. And I'm dropping down here. It says, in Africa, in the land of the degraded Negro, the gospel now stands face to face with the Quran. There the two confluent tides of religious instruction from the West and the East meet. And if you remember from our last session, we were talking about how those two, the wood and stone, Islam and Christianity, are now coming together. Chrislam is what they're calling it. So it says, to a certain extent, the Mohammedans go along with us. In other words, they're in agreement on certain things. Their civil code contained in the Quran forbids the enslaving of a man born of free parents. and professing the Muslim religion, nor can a Muslim be reduced to slavery in any case. The Fulahs have practiced successfully upon this article of the Islamic Code for political objects. In other words, they were not enslaving their fellow Muslims. It says, in their invasions of Negro states, they have invariably made this appeal to the pagan slaves. And in countries where 3/5 of the population are of that class, it may be inferred that numerous converts are made and conquest made easy. Oh boy. It says the Muslims of the West do not regard Christians with the same horror as those of the East. They seem to be favorably impressed by finding that we acknowledge much of their own sacred history, and with them the names of Abraham and Moses. Why not Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? So it says the names of Abraham and Moses serve to recommend our holy books. So they were recommending Christianity. We may make common cause also with them in Africa. in our common abhorrence of the bloody rites and sacrifices of the pagans. Now, what exactly are they referring to? Were they referring to these people that they were enslaving, using or making sacrificial offerings on their feast days? Anyway, it says the political importance of the Fulahs being thus stated, science now demands to know who the Fulahs are and whence descend. So they're making it out like, well, they can't really tell where these people came from. Who do they really descend from? We have another group of people that we can't seem to figure out where they came from. Who are they really, is the question. So they're trying to figure out who these people are exactly. So it says, in the ethnologic point of view, this people presents characteristics not less remarkable. All who have made observations upon them concur in acknowledging that they differ essentially from the Negroes, physically and morally, and if they have not ventured to recognize in them a race distinct from the Negro, they have at least regarded them as a variety altogether special of that race. The Fulans or Fulahs have, however, a tradition among themselves which affiliates them to the white race. So they describe themselves as white, even though they have the tawny brown skin color. So then let's take a look at the DNA information on these people. This comes from the National Library of Medicine, and it's the population history and genetic adaptation of the Fulani nomads. Inferences from genome-wide data and the lactase persistence trait. This is from December of 2019. I encourage you to read, look up the entire article because I'm just going to highlight the results and the conclusion. But it says, based on genome-wide analyses, we propose that ancestors of the Fulani population experienced admixture between a West African group and a group carrying both European and North African ancestries. We know that Esau mixed himself with the European Gentile races. It says this admixture was likely coupled with newly adopted herding practices as it resulted in signatures of genetic adaptation in contemporary Fulani genomes, including the control element of the LCT gene enabling carriers to digest lactose throughout their lives. And we know most of our people cannot handle milk. We know that. So it says, our findings suggest that Eurasian admixture and the European LP allele was introduced into the Fulani through contact with a North African population, and they furthermore confirm the link between the lactose digestion phenotype. So these people have been saying all along, they call themselves white. They say they belong to the white race, even though they have the tawny brown complexion. Obviously, they know who they are. And these results here are proving that there is a genetic mixture. All right, let's see how they are described in this article from the Nigerian Voice. This article was written in March of 2021. It says, Zang revolt, Fulani using Hausa slaves to terrorize Africans. It says the yoke of slavery used by Fulani Arabs and Berbers from the Middle East was rejected by Zang Bantu East Africans since the 19th century. It destroyed Songhai Empire in 1591. The ugly head reared recently in Sudan, and today it is boiling in other African countries. Though denigrated in the Middle East, Europe, or America, the game plan is to make Africans believe they are Fulani Arabs, Berbers, and African Europeans. It is enough to divide, rule, and conquer Africans' political economy. It says the Zang are the 9th century Bantu of East Africa enslaved in ancient Iraq. They staged several bloody guerrilla wars until they overcame and ruled their conquerors in the Abbasid Empire for 15 years. The inhumane subjugation of the Zang Bantu. Who are they subjugating? Bantu tribes. Used for manual labor in the salt marshes of Basra, ancient Iraq, under unbearable conditions, erupted into revolts that led to the greatest rebellion movement by African slaves, not only in the Islamic world, but one of the largest and longest slave rebellions in the history of the world. All right, don't miss this. It says the Fulani remain a minority in Africa with exaggerated power because they have been executing the same tactic since Usman Dan Fodio. They use Africans to capture Africans. Where are they getting this power? That's the question. How did they get all of this influence? It's because they are in cahoots with the European nations. All right, it says, let's drop down. It says, they disdained the descendants and children of African fathers. They had castrated, and African mothers they had raped after capture. Compare these Africans that have never been accepted in the Middle East because of their obvious black phenotype to those who glorify themselves as Fulani in Black Africa. These children of overthrown dynasties and raped women are still carrying out the mission of this Usman Dan Fodio with the Hausa captured slave descendants. Hausa, since Usman Dan Fodio, have been conditioned to toe the line. Even when the minority Fulani do not have the number, they have been able to divide and rule. Who does it sound like? This is not different to the creation of economic privileges in Virginia, USA in 1787 along color line. All right, so I want to share some verses from the Aramaic Targum to Ecclesiastes. It's a word of prophecy given by King Solomon, and there's a link here if you'd like to read the book. It's not that long. But it says, there is an evil I saw in this world under the sun, and it causes damage in the world, like a matter of error, which proceeds hurriedly against a man from a ruler. He gave the wicked and foolish Edom to enjoy muzzle, or good fortune, and to enjoy prosperity from the highest heavens, and his armies are proud and numerous, while the people of the house of Israel are enslaved under him in exile. And from their many sins, so because of their many sins, those rich in property become poor, and in their poverty dwell among the nations. Talking about how we were scattered among the nations because of our sins. He goes on to say, Solomon the prophet said, by the spirit of prophecy, I have seen the people who were enslaved previously to the people of Israel growing strong and riding on horses like rulers, while the people of Israel and their nobles walk like slaves on the earth. So just a little bit of history here. If you remember, the Edomites attacked Israel under Saul's rulership. But then King David defeated them and annexed their land. But after the reign of Solomon, the Edomites revolted. All right, so this goes on to say, the attribute of justice answered and so said, they caused all this themselves. In other words, the children of Israel brought all this upon themselves. Just as a man who digs a pit at the crossroads is liable to fall in it, so a people who transgressed the decree of the, and I'm going to say the Most High, and breached the fence of the world, falls into the hand of the wicked king who bites them like a snake. Think about that now. It says, King Solomon the prophet said, it was revealed to me that Manasseh, the son of Hezekiah, will sin and bow to idols of stone. Therefore he will be delivered into the hand of the king of Assyria, who will bind him with chains because he made light of the words of Torah, which were originally written on tablets of stone. Therefore he will suffer for them. And Rabshakeh, his brother, will worship images of wood, the wood and the stone, and leave the words of the Torah which were put in the ark of the acacia wood. Therefore he will be burned with fire by the angel of the Most High. And when the people of Israel sin, and the heavens will become hard as iron and not give rain, and that generation does not pray before the Most High, so that the rain does not fall, therefore the whole world is wasted by famine. And when they repent and are assembled, overcome their yitzer, or their evil, and appoint leaders to seek mercy from the God of heaven, they have pleasure due to the abundance of the excellence of their wisdom. So those verses that we just read correspond to the verse in Deuteronomy 28:64. Then the Lord will scatter you among all peoples from one end of the earth to the other, and there you shall serve other gods, which neither you nor your fathers have known, wood and stone. So as we wrap this up, we have to take a look at the connection between these two religions. Is it a coincidence that the Catholic Church sanctioned slavery, and this group of people who are predominantly Muslim played such a big role in rounding our people up? So family, we have to stop looking at outer appearances. Just because someone has black skin does not make him or her an ally. And for far too long, we've sought to become one with those who hate us. We have to learn how to identify the skin folk and kinfolk who mean us harm. And this is where the spirit of discernment comes in, or the discerning of spirits. It's imperative for us to be filled with the Holy Spirit so that we can recognize the Judases among us. Don't assume that just because someone looks like you, that they are for you. That's why the Most High looks at the heart, because eventually the seeds planted in your heart is going to bring forth fruit. And we have to be fruit inspectors. Let's examine the fruit. I hope that this message has been a blessing to you all. Shalom, everyone.